Batman was real, and he lived in Venezuela in the year 1811. And hey, I know what you're thinking. Briefed, that is impossible. If there was a real Batman, we would know about it. Well, let me ask you this. What makes Batman? What does a real person need for me to convince you that he was real life Batman? Do you want someone whose parents died before he was 10? Yeah. Do you want someone who is a handsome billionaire with a mean jawline? Yeah. Do you want a man that trained abroad to become a one-man army? Yeah. A man who climbed to the top of a mountain to swear an oath to liberate his people from evil, fight for justice, and become a symbol of hope and fear? Yeah. Well, I got all that and more. And this real-life Dark Knight didn't just save one city from crime. He liberated 5 countries from colonial rule, and his name was Simon. But before Simon Bolivar became El Caballero de la Noche, aka Batman, he was just Simon, a boy born on July 24th, 1783 in Venezuela. Back then, Venezuela was part of the Spanish Empire, because when Europeans came to America in the 15th century, the Spanish colonizers saw all this land that belonged to the indigenous and said, "Mine." Then they killed and conquered everybody and called it Latin America, settled there, and generations later in a land they called Venezuela, a city named Caracas, our Latino Bruce Wayne, Simon Bolivar, was born into a family that made a lot of money in this new world thanks to owning a bunch of plantations and slaves who worked them. So young Simon Bolivar, he grew up happy, like, I'm rich. But then his father died of tuberculosis when he was 3, and his mother died of the same when he was 9, so not so happy anymore. And while that isn't the classic Batman's parents were murdered in an alley, it still gives us a 10-year-old orphan who is rich in gold but bankrupt in love. I'm not gonna lie, that was a deep sense. That's bars. You can use that in your Instagram. Yeah, you can keep that one. You're welcome. Young orphan Bolivar didn't lose everybody close to him though. Even while his parents were alive, the man entrusted with mostly raising and teaching young Bolivar was his butler, mentor, and tutor, Simon Rodriguez. I can't roll R's, so Rodriguez it is. Basically the Alfred to Bolivar's Bruce Wayne. After his parents' death, Rodriguez became the main support in Bolivar's life, and with the help of Rodriguez, that boy was forged into a man, and that man was forged into a crusader for justice. And to make sure his secret identity remains secret and the Bolivar family name stays safe, young Simon used today's sponsor, Aura. Because Aura makes sure all these people trying to steal your personal data get the 5 fingers to the face. You know what I'm saying? Somebody tries to impersonate you online. Slap! Somebody's trying to use your credit. Slap! Somebody puts your number on annoying call lists or floods your inbox with spam. Slap! Whatever digital security worry exists in this world, my sponsor Aura protects you from it. Other services may protect you from identity theft or give you VPN or help you protect your children on the intrawebs, but Aura, they do it all. And if you don't need it all, you can customize it. Don't have kids but just want to make sure you and your partner are protected from identity theft? Aura has a plan for that. Your baby daddy never came back from getting those cigarettes, so it's on you alone to keep your kids safe on the World Wide Web? Aura has a plan for that. I hate the term one-stop shop, but the truth is that Aura is the truth. And to prove that, they let you sign up for free. With my link, aura.com/briefed, you get 14 days without charge. That means once you click the link below, Aura will just run a check for you to see if your social security number is floating around out there, if your pictures are being used on pervy internet sites, if you have a stalker. And Aura, they will take care of business. And if you're like, I don't care if someone uses my identity, I bet you care once someone uses it to drive up your health insurance or buy stuff on your credit card, or your stalker shows up at your address with an opened half-empty tub of Vaseline. With my link, aura.com/briefed, you have 14 free days of getting your digital footprint cleaned the F up. And that's a no-brainer for me. When was the last time someone ran a check on your social security or your children's internet footprint? Exactly. So that's the pitch. Below is the link. All you need to do is click You're welcome. Truth be told, I got a little ahead of myself there earlier. Rodriguez didn't set the young Padawan up on his path against the Spanish Sith Lords just yet. For now, with his parents dead, Rodriguez took young Bolivar under his care and set the groundwork for the freedom fighter Bolivar would become by teaching him the dark truth about Venezuela and Latin America, the truth his money had sheltered Simon Bolivar from, which is a truth that's a bit complicated, but allow me to explain. Alright, so the Spanish come to America in 1492 after dumbass Columbus thought that he found India. Because of that, they call the natives Indians, and because they consider them inferior, they take their lands. But you know that already. Generations later, a bunch of people with Spanish blood are born in this new Latin America and its respective countries that they gave names such as Venezuela and now called home. Particularly, these Spanish born in Venezuela became known as the Creoles, and they were trying to make it work in this new world as best as they could, mining, farming, and doing a bunch of physical work. Well, their part in the physical work was whipping their indigenous and African slaves to actually do the mining and the farming, but still, these Spanish settlers carved out a nice little existence for themselves, growing rich and comfortable in their new home. But then the King of Spain was like,
"Aren't we forgetting one teensy-weensy but ever so crucial little tiny detail? I own you!"
And the Spanish crown demanded taxes, tribute, fealty, and the Spanish settlers, the Creoles, they were like, oh, wow. So that's what it feels like when somebody takes away your land and human rights. And they decided to give America back to the indigenous, gave them their freedom, and left. Of course not, are you kidding? They worked their slaves extra hard because they had to make up for the cut that the Spanish crown was taking. What really pissed the Creoles off, though, is that Spain regularly sent people from the European mainland to Latin America to rule, govern, and profit off of the American lands. The Creoles did not see the absolute irony in what was happening here. To them, it was just unthinkable that someone would come in and just take what's theirs. So eventually, tensions were brewing between the Spanish mainlanders and the Creoles, aka the Spanish settlers. And if you're thinking, that makes no sense. They're just a couple of generations removed and have the same ancestors. Their only difference is their birthplace. And to that I say, yeah, racism makes no sense, but now you know. And because I want to use every opportunity to shine a light on the atrocities committed against the natives, I want to say the names of these tribes from Venezuela because that's at the very least what they deserve. The tribes displaced and murdered in Venezuela were the Timoto Cuica, the Arawak, Carib, and the Wayu. Put some respect on their names.
I ain't gonna say it no more.
But Simon Bolivar, he couldn't care less about the indigenous either. All he cared about was that the Spanish were taken away from the Creoles, the Spanish settlers, his people. And he resented the Spanish mainlanders for it, a resentment that was growing all over Latin America at the time and turned into revolutionary ideas. And Latino Alfred Rodriguez, he fancied himself quite the revolutionary, so he instilled these ideas in young Simon. Then Rodriguez got exiled by the Spanish government for liking these ideas. They considered him a rebel and a traitor. And that was when Bolivar was 14, meaning Simon Bolivar, he lost all that was left of his childhood, lost the family again. And Rodriguez's exile sparked a fury in the young man, an unmatched desire to help the revolution and liberate his home from the Spanish oppressors. And so while some celebrate their Sweet 16th like this, Bolivar celebrated it like this.
The hell are you supposed to be? I'm vengeance.
For his 16th birthday, he officially started his Batman Begins journey. He went to Europe for his training arc. First, he went to Paris, where Bolivar learned French and philosophy, while also mastering the deadly art of fencing. Then he traveled to Spain to study the enemy he wants to use these fencing skills against back home. But once in Spain, he decided to use his other sword to poke something else entirely. He met and fell in love with Maria Teresa Rodriguez del Toro, a Spanish noblewoman, and she showed him that maybe the Spanish weren't all that bad, and instead of ridding his home country from the Spanish mainlanders, Bolivar returned from his trip with one more mainlander. Maria Teresa and Simon Bolivar had gotten married and moved back to Caracas together in 1802. Bolivar's Batman Begins journey was interrupted by the perfect love story. And he had everything, all the money in the world, a beautiful wife, youth, for he was only 19 years young. The future was theirs. But then in 1803, Maria died of yellow fever. With her death, Bolivar lost another attempt at a family, and he fell back into that darkness, seeing Venezuela and the rest of the continent for what it was, invaded by the Spanish enemy. His fate was sealed, and so Bolivar went back to Europe to finish his Batman Begins arc in the most Batman way possible. He climbed the top of a mountain overlooking ruins of the Roman Empire and swore that he would not rest until Latin America was free and he had ended the Spanish Empire. Over the next years, Simón Bolívar spent his time sharpening his deadly sword skills while also finding like-minded freedom fighters and helping to grow the revolution, patiently building an army, fanning the flames of change from the shadows until the revolutionaries found the right time to strike. 1811. The French Revolution was going down hard in Europe. Napoleon Bonaparte had risen to power and invaded Spain, which obviously kept the Spanish monarchy a little bit busy, meaning that Latin America was no longer the main focus of their attention. And so the revolutionaries in Venezuela decided to reveal themselves in a big way. Their forces had grown to about 6,000 fighting men, and they attacked 2,000 Spanish royalists in their fort in the Battle of Valencia, Venezuela, on August 13th, 1811. By the end of the battle, 800 freedom fighters had lost their lives, but more importantly, just as many Spanish royalists had been killed. And more importantly, the revolution had officially put its meat on the table. You know what I'm saying? Everybody knew, we here. But of course, a revolution cannot be fought on passion and will alone. Good thing then that Bolivar was a man with impossible amounts of wealth, and he used the family money to fund the revolution while keeping just enough personal wealth that, from time to time, he could put the sword aside and slip into a suit. And this one time,
at band camp?
He wore that suit all the way back to Europe, to London, where he slipped back into his charming, handsome billionaire persona on a mission to smooth talk the British into helping Venezuela in their fight for freedom against Spain, because maybe Great Britain might be interested in weakening Spain, for some more power in the European trade wars, whatever, it's worth a shot. That was the official intent, but while the billionaire Bolivar was mingling with the rich and sometimes beautiful, the revolutionary fighter in him was on a different mission, to observe the monarchy, their ways, their lifestyle, their idea of governing, and ultimately he came away with one conclusion. Monarchy is the enemy of liberty. For his people to be free, they needed to earn that freedom for themselves. No monarch could help them, or they would just trade masters. The only one who could free Venezuela and South America from its colonizers was Simón Bolívar, or more specifically, El Liberating. I'm not kidding, he really had a superhero name. No cape, no pointy ears, no gadgets, but a uniform, a sword, and grit. By 1822, Bolivar grew the size of the Revolution Army to 8,000, and he led them through Venezuela under the slogan, "Freedom or Death," a slogan they took very seriously as they went from city to city, delivering death to over thousands of Spanish royalists who refused to give these new Latin Americans their freedom. Needless to say, El Libertador didn't have a no-kill rule. The Latino Knight believed that the message of freedom had to be written in blood to be understood. And so by the year 1823, his army had liberated 30 cities across Venezuela, and the death toll amongst the Spanish was over 15,000. But it has to be said that he didn't do it all alone. Few heroes ever do. Most have powerful friends that help them out or team up with them. But Bolivar, man, he operated differently.
I don't have friends. I got family.
And this just further drives home the Batman parallels, because Batman, obviously and famously, has his Bat family that are more than just friends and colleagues. They're family. In Bolivar's Bat family, their first and foremost was Latino Alfred, Simon Rodriguez. He was exiled when Bolivar was 14, but returned to his side in 1824 and stayed a friend, guide, and mentor to El Libertador until the end. Then there was Antonio José de Sucre. He was Bolivar's Robin, his best friend and his right-hand man. The two met in 1817, and ever since, the lawyer Sucre, he fought alongside Bolivar in all major battles, proving himself to be his most brilliant general and deadly on the battlefield. Then there was Francisco Santander, a rebel as much as everybody else, but more valued for his mind and political ideologies, all of which would play a crucial role later, once the fighting was done. Remember that. And then there was Manuela Sainz. She was Bolivar's lover, his henchman, his spy, his everything. Once she saved Bolivar from an assassination attempt and then went back to kill the assassins, spilled their guts with her sword, and when she wasn't fighting alongside him or saving him, she was making love to Bolivar, or putting her life on the line, gathering intel. Manuela was so instrumental to the revolution that her nickname was La Libertadora, the Libertador, the liberator's liberator. You get me? She was important. So, Bolivar and the Bat family are leading the charge for the independence of Venezuela, handing the Spanish defeat after defeat until the Spanish government decides to double down and send reinforcements to South America, and not just in the form of soldiers, but also in the form of propaganda. They fanned the flames of all Spain sympathizers in South America, those who felt loyalty to the Spanish crown and who did not want their independence from it, which were enough for a civil war to break out in Venezuela between those who wanted to cut ties with Spain and those who didn't. A civil war that lasted 4 years and took more than 100,000 lives. Simón Bolívar had since become the unquestioned face of the resistance and a symbol of hope that went beyond the borders of Venezuela, where other countries also started rising up against their Spanish overlords. So, for the Spanish mainlanders, for the crown, Bolívar, public enemy number one, and they came after him hard, sending kill squads to take the man down. Man, Bolívar dodged assassination attempts but he stayed alive. He did have to flee the country on several occasions, and eventually even had to flee all the way to Jamaica in the year 1815, but any real Batman fan knows that you can never keep the Dark Knight away or down for long. If he's away, that just means he's planning, and for a Batman, planning time.
Anything's possible!
Bolívar used his time in Jamaica to write a letter that laid out his dream for a unified Latin America, for a giant democratic republic independent from Spain, a democratic republic that stretches from the Rio de Plata in Argentina to Mexico, which sounds amazing until you remember that they stole all of these lands from the natives and genocided them and weren't planning to liberate them anytime soon. But hey, I'm not here to piss on Bolivar's parade. Maybe a little bit, maybe. But it was a parade. His letter became a manifesto, an ideology that spread like wildfire across the continent, and the revolution gained momentum. Momentum that Bolívar used to strike a deal in Haiti. The president of Haiti liked the idea of having the leader of a unified Latin America owe him a favor. And the only favor the Haitian president asked for was that once Bolívar gains control of his country and the continent, he abolishes slavery of indigenous people and Africans. Very fair, very noble, and Simón Bolívar agreed. And in return, Haiti provided the Latino Knight with ships, guns, and the men to use them. So in the year 1816, El Libertador returned to the fight, returned to Venezuela at the head of an army that was bigger than ever and coming to bring the pain, to bring liberty to now not just all new Americans, but also all slaves. And those freed slaves in turn joined El Libertador to grow the size of his army and bring death to all Spanish oppressors. 5 years of brutal, all-out warfare, all over followed. By the year 1821, more than 150,000 people had died. The Spanish kept sending reinforcements from Europe to keep a numbers advantage over the freedom fighters, but Spanish soldiers, they were fighting for a salary, while Bolivar and his men fought for purpose.
That they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
Despite being outnumbered and constantly starving, Bolivar used the jungles, the swamps, the mountains of Venezuela and Colombia to his advantage to defeat the Spanish with guerrilla tactics until he was able to score a decisive victory in the Battle of Boyacá in 1819. Bolivar and 2,800 of his men crossed the Andes, 4-kilometer-high mountains with winds so vicious that hundreds of Bolivar's men froze to death. But at the end of their march, were there the Spanish army of 2,700 men that did not expect this surprise attack and were defeated in a loss that was so significant that it eventually led to them withdrawing from Colombia. By 1822, Colombia was free from the Spanish and the first country in South America that gained its independence. From there, the Spanish occupation fell like dominoes. Venezuela was freed, Ecuador, Panama, and all these countries were then unified into the free Latin America that Bolivar wrote about in his letter, a new unified country they called Gran Colombia. And Bolivar was its president. The man had won. What's more, he was now at the head of an army of 20,000 men, including thousands of freed slaves, because he kept his promise. And with these numbers, him and his army then liberated Peru and Chile, and for his efforts, Bolivar even got a country named in his honor. Upper Peru was renamed into Bolivia. El Libertador had kept the oath he once made on top of that mountain. He freed his people from the control of Spain, just like George Washington and the gang had done a bit further north. And so, inspired by them, he then wrote constitutions to make sure it stays that way. Bolivar had reached a metaphorical mountaintop and he saw freedom. The only problem was that he didn't trust anybody else to see it too, to share his vision. It gets lonely at the top, and sometimes in this loneliness, mistrust becomes your best friend. Bolivar became convinced that the people are not educated enough to keep this hard-earned liberty alive. He had seen the ways of monarchs, studied them, knew the way they use propaganda and money and promises to prey on the poor, the weak, and Bolivar had seen how the weak and the masses, repeatedly so, stop opposing and keep giving power away to these monarchs. Bolivar worried that without education, the people would just vote for another king. This belief, and in a way this paranoia, it was then cemented by an assassination attempt. The assassination attempt that I mentioned earlier, remember, where his lover Manuela saved his life and sliced up the assassins. Bolivar survived, but it proved to him that the masses, they do not know what is best for them, so that very same year, he dissolved Congress and assumed dictatorial powers, basically making himself a king and filling the hole the Spanish left behind. But he did it to save freedom. He did it with a heavy heart. So he told the people,
I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, I'd like to take this chance to apologize to absolutely nobody.
Bolivar's word was law in all of Gran Colombia now, and no one could get in the way of his idea of freedom. This didn't go over so well with one particular member of the Bad family, Santander. He had been made vice president of Gran Colombia, and he'd become Bolivar's right-hand man in leading this new free nation. Santander was the one Bolivar shared political visions and ideologies of freedom with, and that vision, it was to give power and freedom to the people, not to give power to one man who believes he knows best what freedom is. That was exactly what they fought against. So Santander split from the Bad family and openly rebelled against Bolivar, calling for decentralization of power and for Bolivar to heed the words of the Constitution, to give power to the people, as was the original purpose of their cause. So with his right-hand man and longtime friend speaking some sense into him, Bolivar said,
Fine. I'll do it myself.
And he had Santander exiled. With his increasingly authoritarian decisions, the people quickly turned on their former hero and liberator. Regionalism took over each country of Gran Colombia. They wanted their independence from President Bolivar, but every push against Simón Bolívar resulted in him becoming more authoritarian, using violence to suppress these rebellions, to keep his vision of a unified Latin America alive, to keep Gran Colombia whole and under his control. A king waged war against the people he had freed from their previous king. And he did it in the name of freedom. Well over 20,000 people died. Bolivar's dream of freedom had become a nightmare, and he had become the antagonist of his own story. Gran Colombia was engulfed in civil wars, and far, very far from the unified Latin America Bolivar had imagined and only held in his hands for the briefest of moments before power corrupted him absolutely. And soon, his body was corrupted too. Just like his parents before him, he contracted tuberculosis in 1830, and his body could no longer withstand the hardships of a dictatorship, forcing him to resign his presidency. The same illness that took his parents and threw him into darkness, that set him up to become a crusader for justice, that same illness now took Bolivar, after he had strayed from his path, back into the darkness. On December 17th in 1830, the former hero of millions, Simón Bolívar, died alone in Santa Marta, Colombia, as the continent around him burned.